Hi, everybody.
Welcome back to
Book
BookClub.
Thank you, by the way, to everybody who watched on YouTube the last episode, because it did more views than all of our other episodes, except for the ACOTAR one, which was the very first episode over a year ago. So,
Yeah.
shout out to you guys. Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for that.
And also in honor of that, if you're a new person watching, for whatever reason, go follow our little Book Girly YouTube channel that we just started. There's only 2 videos on there, but they're good. So get on that.
And there will be more.
And there will be more.
So you should go
Today,
watch
in
them.
honor of everybody liking the Gen Z versus Millennial book talk episode, we're going to do something kind of similar. We're going to be comparing Millennial versus Gen Z young adult
YA.
novels. YA, because the two generations, I feel like those categories are very different. Like,
yeah.
YA now is very different from YA in like the 90s, early 2000s. So that's what we're going to be talking about. We have some notes because we are research queens these last 2 episodes. We have been looking shit up for once, to an extent. That being said, take everything we say with a grain of salt, because we're
Always.
not trying that hard to get the right answers, but we do have opinions and have sort of kind of looked shit up. So,
And also,
you
we're
know.
not millennials. So, like,
yeah, we're Gen Z. We're like right smack dab in the middle of Gen Z.
yeah, we're like the good Gen Z,
But-
because there are bad ones.
Yeah, but if you're looking at my nail that popped off, no, you're not. Fuck you.
I ripped all of
but
my nails off, so I look like a boy.
I just
Not
have
that
the
having nails
one.
makes you look like a girl. Whoops.
We're off to a great start.
Off to an
but-
awesome start.
We have some credibility. If you watch the last episode, we talked to my older sister, who is a young millennial, her mom, who is an older millennial, and also we're on the internet, so really you can find anything on there. And we asked
Also,
ChatGPT.
Something
So,
that we did ask
obviously.
ChatGPT, my girl, we haven't done in a really long time. I'm Maddie. That's Carrie. We've stopped introducing
Yeah.
ourselves.
You're so right. We did stop introducing ourselves. Welcome to Book Club.
Yeah.
I was actually thinking on that note, before we get back to the actual topic of this episode, we're about to wrap up season 1 of Book Club, even though it went on for well over a year. But I've been waiting because I want us to have a new little intro, and what I think we should do is, if you're watching in the future and you see this happen, you'll know that it was a success. In the little intro, we can do a thing that's like, I'm Maddie, I'm Carrie, and welcome to Book Club. Something like that.
Okay, yeah.
Or do our
Cute.
do our little welcome back to Book Club, that little thing that we do.
Yeah.
And that's the intro. So it will be in the beginning of every episode. Because you're so right.
Cute.
I think it's maybe been 6 months since we introduced ourselves.
Yeah, we had a thing going where we were like, oh, well, we need to introduce ourselves at every, like, at the beginning for people if, you've never seen an episode before. And then one day we just stopped and forgot.
Yeah. Well, welcome to
So.
Book Club. Anyway, maybe we'll do it on this
Yeah.
episode. Maybe I'll make a new little intro for this episode. Maybe I will. I think I will.
Probably not, considering it goes out tomorrow.
That's really fair. Okay, maybe
But-
next episode.
Maybe next
Maybe
week.
this will be the last episode of season 1.
Season 1. We'll see.
Maybe. We'll see.
Who knows?
Who
Guess we'll
knows?
never know. You'll know in 3 weeks.
Well, you'll know in 3 weeks. 2 weeks. You'll find out.
anyways, back to the topic at
Anyways.
hand.
Where should we even start? We have a list of some millennial young adult novels and some Gen Z young adult novels. Now, with the millennial ones,
It
these
was kind
novels
of
are not-
hard.
these aren't necessarily all ones that came out when millennials were young adults, or when they were like in like the millennial time period, but they are book series and novels that we associate as Gen Z people on Book Talk and on the internet, that we associate with millennials. And I feel like a lot of millennials like really grabbed onto. And if you're a millennial and you're watching this, you can let us know if we're wrong or if you disagree or if you agree. Because we don't really know. This is just our opinion on what it is.
You know what was also popular that I literally just thought of because my mom read it when she was a young girl?
What?
And this is going to be for older millennials. The Babysitters Club.
Was that a TV show at one point?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they made it into a TV show, but it was a book series.
Yeah, I've definitely heard of it. But I haven't read it. A lot of these millennial ones I haven't read.
It's a series of novels written by Anne Martin and published by Scholastic between 1986 and 2000 that sold more than 190 million copies.
Wow. I think we should just start kind of talking about the books that we associate with millennial versus Gen Z. And then we have a little category of things such as like kind of some of the differences overall, how we feel about YA versus A, like young adult versus adult novels in both generations, and go from there.
Yeah.
So, starting with millennial, we have, like you said, the Babysitters Club. When we were talking about things, oh my goodness. Hey, Mochi girl. Hey, Mochi girl. When we were talking about like looking up, trying to find some books that were considered millennial young adult novels, we noticed that things are they felt a lot more fantasy based. Like romance and fantasy were pretty separate in comparison to how they are now. There's
right,
not
because
a lot of fantasy
romantasy
books.
is so popular now.
Yeah. Also, too, to clarify, young adult is majority targeted towards 12 to 18, and then adult is obviously 18 and up. There is some gray area in there that we'll get into later, but when we are considering young adult, we're talking teenagers, basically.
No spice.
No spice. If there is,
because
which again, there's some gray area. Once it starts to get into, we also have it kind of subcategorized from like prepubescent
to pubescent. Like 12
pubescent.
to 15 is drastically different from 16 to 18. In my opinion.
I would agree. At least for women. But with millennial YA, it seemed that fantasy was pretty on its own thing, like in its own category, and romance was in its own category. There was some crossover here and there, but not nearly as much as there is now. Specifically, Harry Potter. We talked about this in the last episode. Millennials they were the target audience for Harry Potter, or young millennials, I guess, because Harry Potter was intended for children. Am I correct? Yeah. It was.
I think it was originally intended for older children. I would say like late elementary to middle and
like
high
5th
school.
grade and up.
Yeah.
But the thing is with Harry Potter, and we have some other books that fall into this category too, as the book series went on, it got more
mature.
Complicated. Yeah. So then it's like, all right.
There were things that might not be completely comprehensible for an 11-year-old.
Not even just with spice. It's like, can this like storyline, can the themes of this book be comprehended by an elementary school student? Where Sorcerer of Stone? Yeah. Deathly Hallows? I don't know.
No.
But
you'd have to be a very, very smart child to complete.
Advanced
but like that's
kid,
kind of to completely understand like all of the themes inside of the books. But that's like kind of the same for kind of all of the series that we talk about, because like the further on, even with like I said this last night when we were kind of discussing what we were going to talk about, even with like Throne of Glass, I feel like a 12, 13-year-old could read Throne of Glass, Crown of Midnight and be fine. Once you get to like Heir of Fire, no. I don't think a middle schooler is going to be comprehending fully to the extent of, somebody upwards of 16, 17, 18.
Yeah. But then that also brings us to the next category of another millennial YA, which I actually don't know. I would like when I think YA, I'm thinking if I had a teenage daughter, would I let her read this? And Twilight was obviously a big one for millennials, huge one. It was probably, I would say it was probably the next big book to movie thing after Harry Potter. Harry Potter was like almost the catalyst for it. Millennials really like went in hard on that. I think Gen X or whatever was still trying to like read To Kill a Mockingbird and not be racist. Millennials were the first ones that were like, hey, we're kind of advancing, we can maybe read for fun. And that's a joke, don't get mad at me. They started reading Twilight, which we also talked about in the last episode briefly, that I feel like this was the first series that like teenagers really got into, my sister included, was a big, like, I'm talking 15, 16, big Twilight fan. Like going to the midnight premieres, had all the merch, everything. And Twilight is the first one that I think I was ever aware of that was fantasy and romance. It was honestly, I'd probably even say mostly romance.
Yeah, with like a touch.
However,
of fantasy.
it was very, very clean, traditional romance in a sense of like the most crazy thing that was happening in Twilight for a very, very long time in the series until Edward and Bella got married was Edward would just sit in her room, and like that was like the most scandalous thing going on in Twilight. So like, I mean, I haven't actually sat down and read all the way through, but I don't know. I think especially if you had a more like advanced teenager, I would let them read Twilight.
There's nothing happening in Twilight. Even like, I'm pretty sure when they do finally have sex after they're married, which like, it's very Puritan behavior to let Stephenie Meyer is pushing in Twilight, which there's nothing wrong with that. You know, that's fine. But like,
but there's nothing I'd be worried about.
13, 14, 15, I knew what sex was. Do I think that we need to be reading like
I wouldn't be reading
Icebreaker? Yeah. No, I don't think that is necessarily completely appropriate for a
and I think too,
teenager to consume. But also, if you look at like what boys are consuming at that age, whether their parents know what they're consuming or not, you know.
You can find a lot of bad shit on the internet.
You can find a lot of crazy shit. Yeah, at least they're like, and a lot of the times, at least with female authors, at least it's typically empowering from a woman's standpoint, and it's not inherently violent.
I think that would be the only thing is like you have with something maybe like Twilight. I'm not really sure, haven't read it, but I do know there are certain lines where Edward is like maybe like a little possessive, or like in honestly a very traditional conservative man headspace.
Yeah.
And I think that is possibly something that's like, if you're not having like open conversation with your children, that's probably something that they could like get into their brain that it was normal for a man to act that way, where Edward was like a little bit weird. But it wasn't anything like detrimental. Like it was, for the most part, it's just a fun little romance about vampires. And honestly, I don't even know if it's actually categorized as young adult. I would assume that it is, but I don't know.
I don't know. And we didn't like, we were right at that age. Like technically, again, we are Gen Z, but we did fall into the marketing of Twilight. Like I saw all of the movies. And I saw the last two, both Breaking Dawns, at the midnight premiere.
At the midnight premiere, because we were 12 when that happened?
Like I was throwing a tantrum on the floor begging my mom, and she was like, fucking fine, Jesus Christ. But I do also remember at 10 years old picking, like, my mom bought me the Twilight books because my cousin, who's a few years older than me, was obsessed with them. And I was like, well, I want to try to read them. And I got about 50 pages into Twilight at 10, and I was like, what the fuck is going on? What the fuck
Yeah,
are
and I
these
think
words?
there are just certain things where it's like Harry Potter, very, very easy to digest.
Yeah.
That would be honestly, I'd kind of say like maybe the poster child for a young adult fantasy series. You
I
can
agree.
read the entirety of it as specifically, maybe not as a fifth grader when a lot of kids start reading it, but like if you are actually young adult, 12 to 18, you can read the entirety of that series and you'd probably be able to understand it as long as you were like a competent 12-year-old.
And I think J.K. Rowling did, I'm not like praising her in any way. We know she's shitty, but I think she did a good job with like who the first like Sorcerer's Stone was targeted to, what age group. As she was writing, they were getting
She
older.
grew up. Yeah, she grew up.
Yeah,
with
so like
that
the
specific
books
audience.
kind of grew up with them.
Yeah.
Which again is
And
how I
honestly,
kind of feel about Throne of Glass. Like if you started
I was
reading
gonna say
Throne
the
of
same thing.
Glass, you know, when SJM started releasing them and you grew up with, you know, as Throne of
with the
Glass was being
series.
released, then, you know, it makes total sense. And I think
Yeah.
that can be completely appropriate. But there are definitely, but like I've seen on TikTok now, little teenage girls reading Icebreaker. I saw a little girl
No.
reading Haunting Adeline. What the fuck? What the hell?
That kind of brings us into, if we want to talk a little, we'll kind of go back and forth, but if we want to talk a little bit about Gen Z YA, one of the biggest things I feel like I noticed is that the gray area between
Is a
young
lot
adult
more gray.
and adult is a lot more gray than it was with millennials and like just the 90s, early 2000s. And I think a lot of that has to do with like influence from the internet. And I'm not a statistics person. I don't really fucking know. I'm literally just going off of the vibe that I'm getting. And I looked it up last night. The trend of romance and rom-com covers looking really bright, colorful, almost cartoony started in like 2010 and on, which is as like
The rise of social media.
If you're the rise of social media, Gen Z was
really
like that was like
the
kind
rise
of our
of social
prime as a
media
young adult.
hit. Yeah, and it hit like Instagram came out. I remember Instagram launching and like everybody being excited about it when we were in 6th grade in 2012.
Yeah, and
so like
it's
that was
very
kind of
easy
the
now if
prominent time.
if you're a Gen X mom or a millennial mom and you have a preteen or a teenager who wants to go to Target and pick out a book, it's very misleading if you don't.
Yeah,
they look
if you
like
don't
they
know.
could be kids' books. Specifically, things like Icebreaker, where they even the characters on there, like it's like a little ice skater and a hockey player. It looks like it could be a sweet little romance, and then there's some that like are even in the young adult category that I'm like, I don't know. They're kind of suggestive. I like Lightlark, the Lightlark series, Lightlark, Nightbane, and Skyshade, which like the series in my opinion
where it gets
did go downhill just like as a book series. However, if I had a 15-year-old, would I let her read, I don't know, Lightlark? Sure. By time you get to Skyshade, it's kind of raunchy. Is it technically closed door? I don't even know. It's like the door is cracked open.
Yeah,
It's
you can
not,
like you're kind of peeking in.
It's
But
not
again, I would rather
it's not
my
the same
child
as like ACOTAR where it was like
she
ran my
splayed
hand
out
down
on the
his
fucking
length. Like
Yeah.
something like that.
It
But
wasn't
but it is like very, very suggestive as like, oh, he put his hands I don't know, in like a suggestive area, like around my waist and farther down. I was like, oh, that's really funny. Because Sabrina Carpenter is religiously horny.
Yeah.
And
Religiously
she was like,
horny.
honestly though, she's in a public school in Texas. Like, she's gonna find out about sex and like everything that falls into that somewhere. At least she's like, at least I know what she's listening to, which is like, if you're a millennial mom or a Gen X mom and you're not paying attention to what your preteens or your teenagers are reading, you would look at something like Icebreaker and, or even like some of the country romances, or like Allie Hazelwood, or like Tessa Bailey. Tessa Bailey gets crazy, but her covers are very cutesy girly, and they look, if you didn't know any better, you would be like, oh yeah, okay, it just looks like a little,
That's fine.
why, like, even the characters, sometimes they don't even look like adults necessarily, specifically with things like college hockey romance. They're kind of drawn to where they could be a teenager, you don't know.
Yeah.
And then you think it's a young adult, and it's not. And it said, whenever I was looking everything up, it said that like it's because of the rise of social media that how books are marketed now is very different. And you need something that's going to pop on a TikTok or on Instagram, or going to really like catch your attention. And a traditional romance cover, like the Renaissance with the Fabio with his shirt open, not going to catch your attention on a TikTok anymore.
Yeah, no, it's catching, that's going to catch the attention of a Gen X, or a Gen X and Boomer.
Gen X and Boomer.
But it's not.
Maybe.
Oh no, they love them.
No, I know they love them, but like, I'm like saying, if they're scrolling on TikTok, are they like, they're not gonna watch that.
Oh yeah,
Book
I don't
Talk
think
is
they still.
very millennial and Gen X coded, and it's because it's also supposed to be like, people now, especially, like, it's the aesthetic of it. It's like, yes, do we read because we love books? Absolutely.
But there is
about what my bookshelf looks like.
What's on your bookshelf? Yeah, Boomers and Gen X, I feel like they're reading like the classic, like what their moms read.
They're reading Wuthering Heights and being miserable.
Well, there's romance that they read. Like,
I know,
yeah,
there's some good ones in there
that they like. But like, they're not as concerned with like the cutesiness of it all.
Yeah.
Because
honestly,
when they're on social media, let's be honest, they're being fear-mongered 90% of the time.
Yeah.
But
I want to read one of those like traditional romances, like the Renaissance romances, to see.
Yeah, with Fabio on the front.
Yeah, I want to know how raunchy they get, because I'm wondering if it was like an incline with the rise of the internet, people getting desensitized, or you could add more stuff like that into books.
Yeah.
Or if it was all like an adult novel, if that was almost sky shade coded, where it was a little, almost the door cracked open, whereas we've seen, the doors wide open sometimes.
Our friend McKenna, who's in our book club, she was saying, I'm pretty sure, because her mom and grandma read those, and she was saying they get raunchy, like they get spicy.
Yeah, that's what I would think, because I'm like, okay, there's a lot of like, I've seen
like romance has always been consumed by primarily women.
Yeah, which is why so many people shit on it or don't see it as a real genre, or as much of a credible genre, where like you can read, but then you can get into school and they are going to ban all these other books that are actually like, I Who Have Not Known Man, they would never teach that in school, but they'll teach Lord of the Flies.
For some godforsaken reason.
No, literally. But no, I just think it's very interesting. I wonder how millennials feel about, like, if they were to read something like, I don't know, even like the dark romance books.
Yeah.
If that was something that was like marketed
there's like a weird period, I would say like the early 2000s, because millennials were like, some of them were adults, some of them were young adults, and then some Gen Zs were young adults. Like, that's kind of like the overlap period, like 2000 to 2008, I feel like, which is kind of where Twilight falls. But also, like, I don't know if this was, I know that, like, I remember it from elementary school. I never consumed it, but like the Spiderwick Chronicles, which is by Holly Black, who is the author of Cruel Prince, which Gen Z
is very popular
loves.
Now. Not by me.
We personally hate it, but it is one of the very popular book talk like books.
And it was even
romantic.
it got put in movies, I think.
The Spiderwick Chronicles? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And now that I'm looking at this little list that we have, and one of the things I'm also noticing, and again, I could be wrong, I don't have every young adult novel that was marketed to millennials, but aside from maybe the Uglies series or whatever that I have under the millennial category, it seems like Gen Z's young adults got a little more dystopian, maybe a little more political, like with Hunger Games and Divergent. Maddie and I do claim Hunger Games and Divergent as a Gen Z. It was like, yes, if you were a young millennial, you could have been in high school, maybe. But for the most part, middle school and high school,
like our middle school years were shaped by Hunger Games and Divergent. Like it was very, and even like the younger Gen Zs, like one of my little brother's friends, and my brother's 6 years younger than us, so he was still in elementary school when Hunger Games was very popular, and him and his friends are always like, man, it would have been so cool to be like a teenager in like the time where the Hunger Games was like, you know, at its peak. And obviously we're kind of re-hitting that peak specifically with Hunger Games because Suzanne has many things to say, which,
and who's mad about it? Not
appreciate. Me. All hail Suzanne. We love her. But like even younger Gen Zs are like, man, I wish I would have been a teenager consuming the Hunger Games. Like we were really the prime of Hunger Games and Divergent. Like those were the two. There was another one, I feel like. Oh, like The Fault in Our Stars. John Green was also very popular. Those were like the,
and I think too,
very developmental books for us.
Yeah. I would say that like Hunger Games was also after Twilight, it was the next really, really big book to movie series. Tifio, like The Fault in Our Stars was also really big, but it was a one-off. With Hunger Games, it was like the big series, and it was also like Twilight, not super political. Harry Potter arguably has both, but for the majority of the people consuming Harry Potter, like we said in the last episode, it was very like, it's just a fantasy world. We're just enjoying almost the escapism that J.K. Rowling created in the Harry Potter universe. Hunger Games felt a little more real than that.
No, Suzanne was loud with the comparison.
Yeah. Like we're looking at post-apocalyptic Panem looked like America.
Right. And it was like if you look at the map, each district is like
and you're seeing
it literally is based on
older. Same thing if you're watching Songbirds and Snakes, it kind of looks very 1950s-esque with the technology that they had, but almost like in the future. Very interesting comparisons there, and we were like shaped on that, which I feel like now that we're talking about it, last episode we kind of touched on the differences in how Gen Z is just a little bit louder. They're a little more like, I'm gonna say this thing to you and I'm going to stand by it, and I'm going to make these connections to my real life, sometimes to a fault. And millennials are a lot quicker to disassociate, use escapism as a way of a coping mechanism. They're a bit more of a depressed generation, in our opinion, with like the stereotypical gray cloud depression, what you imagine. And so it would make sense. It's like, okay, yeah, they were raised almost on escapism with like, oh, it's just Bella and Edward, and they're in this blue casted rainy forest, and that's the only thing that matters to them. That's all that matters. And then it was like Harry Potter, and that's very escapism, like
like the bad guys in, like, it didn't really seem like, and maybe I'm wrong again, we haven't read the Twilight books. The Volturi, the three of them, like obviously there was, vampire hierarchy, but it didn't really feel like the Volturi was based off of anything specific. You can look at the Capitol and you're like, oh, right. right. So that's
our government.
That's our government and A-list celebrities. Like, right. While we're all suffering and dying and hungry, they're taking drinks to make them throw up so they can enjoy more food.
It was a little more calls coming from inside the house. Like, hey, like, turn around. what you're reading it could be real.
Open your fucking eyes. It was kind of like that, whereas Twilight was like, okay, there's 3 bad guys. Now what?
Yep. And it was just like, it was very much the concept of like, you're in real life with Twilight, Harry Potter, even Percy Jackson, which we also had under Millennial.
Oh yeah.
It was kind of gave this vibe of like, honestly, even the Vampire Diaries too. I haven't read the books, but I've seen parts of the show and stuff. And I know that's also more millennial coded. It's like you're in real life, you live like a regular, normal, everyday life, but then something happens.
There are just vampires on the side.
Whatever happens, and then there's a separate world that you can go to or you can be involved in and you didn't know was there, like the vampires and the werewolves or Hogwarts or like anything like that. And it's almost separate from what your real life is. And that kind of shaped, in my opinion, a lot of the like allure of fantasy, similar to Holly Black. She does the same thing. Here's real life. Here's Feyland. It's
with
very
millennials.
separate.
It was like, really? I think the opposite.
Yeah. Really?
Because with millennials, it's like they live alongside us. Like they're just there and we just don't know. Regular people just don't know. There's like a wall or something, like with Holly Black, there's a wall that you go over. Like, but like with
when you
Twilight,
go into this other
they're
world,
just there. They're just there amongst regular humans.
Yes, but if I'm talking about like the conflict of the books, like what they're focused on, it's like, oh, you're this regular person and all of a sudden you're swept away into almost what feels like a different environment, like there's different rules. There's, regular life is a regular, like Twilight, you have police officers. It's very regular, but then now you're in vampire world, you answer to the Volturi. It's a completely different system. Whereas growing up how we did on Hunger Games and Divergent, it was very government controlled and like there was a lot of parallels to what
but it wasn't taking
in real life.
It wasn't like in Twilight, it's like, oh, this is Forks, Washington in America.
Yeah.
This is America. It's just like there's the Volturi that the vampires listen to. Mm-hmm. Whereas Panem never was America once said. It's literally its own, like there's, with millennials, it's almost like, oh, well, we have this society that exists, that coexists along with what we all know as everyday life, with Divergent, with Hunger Games, ACOTAR, Throne of Glass. It's a whole separate universe that had a lot more world building in they had to create SJM had to create an entire system of magic, which I guess J.K. Rowling did too, but not completely, you know what I mean? Like there was still
they still had muggles. It was still
there was still regular humans, but with
and it wasn't set
SJM
in like medieval times, which I will say I'm interested to read.
It's a completely different
I'm interested
world.
to read Crescent City.
And Me too.
Because Crescent City is modern day fantasy.
More modernized.
Which I think is interesting. But my point was that more about how millennials versus Gen Z bring the books that they're reading and compare them to their real life. Whereas yes, with the millennial young adult books, it seemed very like you can be a normal person. It was very like, hey, this is a regular person in this regular day and age in this state or this town. But they were tired of living real life and something happened and they ended up being involved in some type of fantasy group or world or something like that. And they were kind of taken away. Like Bella wanted to be away from human life. She wanted to be a vampire, from the get-go. She was tired of having human emotions and human, routine. She wanted to just completely separate from it. And then, same thing with Harry Potter. Harry Potter was tired of being with the Muggles. He only ever wanted to be at Hogwarts doing magic away from Muggle world. Whereas some of the books we grew up on, it was like, yes, Hunger Games was set in a completely different universe, maybe, but the topics that it was dealing with was like, this is a girl in her real life with inside of a
fucked up system.
and it was the plot of the story is like, yes, there's a subplot of romance with her and Peeta, but
it wasn't,
main plot is the corrupt government.
Right. Katniss wasn't driven by, like, there were moments in which she was driven by her love for Peeta, but like she was kind of used as like a martyr, as like as a teenage girl for the rebellion, and she was driven by multiple other things that were like, Bella wanted to be a vampire solely driven by the fact that she liked Edward.
Yep.
Aelin,
and she didn't
want to be Fae because she was tired of being human. Aelin wanted to fix her fucking kingdom. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
and also too, Aelin kind of was like, I don't know if this is canon, but I saw a thing that was like Aelin was Fae, and the way that Rowan and all the other cadre could transform into animals of some sort, her animal form was her human form. Yeah. Rowan didn't have a human form.
Right.
She just constantly lived as a human. But like, I think that's my point with like how the young adult books of each generation kind of formed how we go about our adulthood. Where it's like millennials are very quick to be like, oh, this is just how regular life is. I wish there was something else. I wish I could escape somewhere. Gen Z is like,
well, let's fucking change the system.
Obviously, Gen Z has escapism. Like, we read all the fantasy books as well. Right. But if we're talking about the big ones of
if we're talking about the founding fathers, the staples.
Yeah. The staples of our young adult novels, it was Hunger Games, immediately followed by Divergent. And then we even had things like The Fault in Our Stars, where it was like very teenage core. One of the things I saw when I was looking up kind of like definitions and stuff of what categorizes young adult is deals with a lot of themes of the transition from teenager to adult, anything like transitionary, and which is why there can be some gray area when like romance and sex comes into play. But with something like The Fault in Our Stars, I read that as an 8th grader. We were obsessed with it, and it deals with some pretty heavy shit. Not necessarily government stuff, but like it deals with cancer and child cancer nonetheless, and death, and it has romance, and there's sex in that book, but it's not in like a spicy way. It's in like a human experience way.
Yeah.
And it's not, there is not really any escapism going on in The Fault in Our Stars. It's just what it is, and it's traumatizing. And you know what, too, makes me think of like things that were traumatizing for specifically our generation, our era of Gen Z. So like 1998 to 1990, or 1998 to like 2001, maybe 2003. Yeah, sure. That little gap right there, the turn of the century group. This, I don't know if it was a book, but I feel like it definitely probably was. Bridge to Terabithia.
I think it was.
I think it was a book, and whoever turned that book into a movie, fuck you. Fuck you for that. You traumatized an entire section of a generation. I have not met one person that is within my like generation that watched that has like almost escapism, and then it got way too fucking real. And you know what the equivalent of that would be for millennials that I think? I think would be
Never Ending Story. Oh.
I have not seen Never Ending Story.
Scary. Don't ever watch it. It's fucking terrible.
Oh, is it the one with the weird puppets?
Yes,
or whatever?
It's weird.
Yeah. That's scary.
It was like, it's in Stranger Things.
Yes, it is.
It's a never ending story. Na, na, Yeah.
But I think
It's terrifying,
their
and I
version
don't
of,
recommend
like,
it.
I think their version of a movie that was, I mean, Bridge to Terabithia is definitely more like this is fantasy and then it gets real life real quick. But My Girl, that one with Macaulay Culkin when he was really little, and
Yeah, and she dies by getting stung by all the bees. Fuck that movie.
the boy dies.
Whatever. Whoever dies. Fuck that movie.
And it's really terrible.
Yeah, you know, that
that was
definitely
very
is their
millennial
version,
coded.
because I remember my mom, like a few years ago, I was in high school, I think. My mom was like, hey, you have to watch this movie that I watched as a child. And I was like, we watched it. And I was like, what the fuck, Mom?
No, literally, that happened. So this happened with my mom. She showed me, I don't know if anybody has seen Hope Floats with Sandra Bullock, but I remember growing up watching this movie constantly. And I thought, oh my God, this movie is so funny. I loved watching it. And then I started dating Dylan when I was like 18. And one of the first movies that I was like, oh, if you're going to understand my family and our humor, you have got to see Hope Floats with Sandra Bullock. And we watched it and I was like, no, it gets really funny. And I hadn't seen it since I was a child. And I was like, he was like, right, so where the fuck is the funny part? And I was like, no, it'll be there, I think. It never came. The plot of that movie is Sandra Bullock got publicly humiliated on TV, on one of those reality shows where it was like her girlfriend, her like best girlfriend was sleeping with her husband, so they got a divorce. She had to go back to her small country hometown. Everybody knew she got divorced. And the book is literally about her children hating her for getting divorced from their dad and her trying to like function again in a small country town where everybody knows her business. And it's so fucking sad. It is so fucking sad. And Dylan was like, right, so where the fuck is the funny part? There was one part where the grandma like sings a little song out of the 2-hour movie. And I was like, I think that was the only thing I remembered was that part being funny. And my mom being like, we should watch this movie. That's crazy.
I've never even heard of that movie.
It is so fucking sad. And again, like still with My Girl, watched it one time. I'll never watch it again. Bridge to Terabithia, watched it one time. I'll never watch it again, but it's seared into my brain.
You know what else is in that weird, could be millennial, could be Gen Z, Narnia.
Yeah, Narnia
is Narnia millennial?
Shit.
Is Narnia Gen Z?
Yes.
Narnia
I would say
freaked
Narnia
me
is
the
millennial.
fuck out though. I remember watching
freaked me out
it.
too. I remember there being a lot of discourse. I was from a very small town in North Texas when Narnia was coming out. I remember there being a lot of discourse on if Narnia was witchcraft.
Yeah, because Harry Potter was, everybody was in Texas at least.
Everybody I was around was able to read Harry Potter, but Narnia and the Spiderwick Chronicles
Really?
were a no-go. Yeah.
See, Harry Potter was the one where, like, I know
there were some kids that couldn't read Harry Potter.
Yeah, you can tell we're from, like, small, like, well, not super small town, but, like, just, yeah, you can tell we're from the Bible Belt because I knew multiple fucking people who were not allowed to consume Harry Potter or Narnia or the Spiderwick Chronicles because it was witchcraft. And against God. And against the church.
Yeah. But I think with Narnia, I ended up seeing on TikTok a lot of like Narnia lore because I never read the rest of the books. I only ever saw the first one. And
that little fucking white
jumps,
queen.
The time jumps freak me out. And
she kills that little boy.
Yeah, she does. You're so
The queen? Right. Doesn't she kill him?
Or she turns him to stone or something, and then he ends up not being stone. I don't know.
I don't know. I just remember it being traumatizing.
But I do remember that it was like, oh, they live out their lives in Narnia as princes and princesses, and then they go back through the wardrobe because they forgot about it, and they come back and they're children again. And to me, oh, that's a mindfuck. It's gonna make.
I thought they all died.
It's gonna make me freak out.
I thought that she escaped, that one of them survived and she went back to Narnia because that's the only place they were alive.
So I think I think what happened was, I could be wrong, but I think what happened is they go to Narnia, right? They live out king and queen with Aslan or whatever, the lion man, and they forget about the wardrobe. They grow up there. They build a kingdom. They find the wardrobe again, because it's multiple books. They find the wardrobe again, come back through, and their children again. And that is how the first movie ends. But then the rest of the books go on, and they go back to Narnia, and it's been 1,000 years since they were there. They find the wardrobe again, but the kingdom is gone. Aslan is gone because it's been 1,000 years in Narnia time. And then something happens. I don't know. They end up back in the real world, and they all get in like a train wreck, and everyone except for the oldest sister dies, but they basically, I guess their heaven was Narnia, and so they're back in Narnia because they still believed in it. But as the older sister grew up and became an adult in the real life, she stopped believing in Narnia, and so she never got to go back.
Right. So it's like Peter Pan crossed over
Peter Pan
with
core.
Polar Express.
I don't know, but it's terrible.
Can somebody drop in the comments what the fuck is Narnia about?
Yeah, maybe that's why millennials are kind of weird. They had some really fucked shit going on, and it was like the crazy shit and then complete escapism. There wasn't a whole lot of middle ground.
Yeah.
And then Gen Z was like, Hunger Games, corrupt government. Let's
fight back against
start
the
a revolution. Yeah.
It said
Who's
rage
the man?
against
we don't know, but we
rage
are
against that
back.
fucking machine for real. like you know, millennials have Rage Against the Machine, but there's the millennials that take Rage Against the Machine and they're like, yeah, Trump loves this song. Trump is the machine. Actually, that's what they're raging against. Like they listen to Green Day and they're like, hell yeah, brother, I'm flying a fucking what's the Confederate flag to Green Day, and Green Day's like,
yeah.
Right, so you completely misunderstood. You completely misunderstood.
And I think...
And Gen Z is like, we're not misunderstanding. And in fact, we have more to add.
I think to wrap everything, like, as like the last point before we wrap up, Gen Z also now is starting to have, again, because of the influence of TikTok and social media, we're getting young adult novels like... anything by Jenny Han, To All the Boys I've Loved Before. The Summer I Turned Pretty is a very big one. The Summer I Turned Pretty actually kind of took both generations by storm. Millennials love that shit too. And then the last one, we still don't really know. Apparently Shatter Me is supposed to be young adult, but I see a lot of things on TikTok that it's really popular books, really trendy sounds, and I'm like, oh, there ain't no way that's a young adult book. But then
Aaron
is, and
Warner
vice versa.
Gives the same energy. Like it could be because Powerless is YA, but like no one has me in a chokehold the way that Kai Azar does. There are no spice scenes with Kai and Payton. I would still lay down my life for Kai Azar. So I'm wondering if Aaron Warner is like kind of like just like the energy
maybe
he
like
exudes
that
on page.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
I don't know. I just feel like there's definitely more of a gray area. Because one, there are parents that are not paying attention to what their children are reading just because reading is so popular now and covers don't look like, you know, you could put a adult book in a young adult section of Barnes & Noble and it might blend in. There's a good chance it would.
Hell, I probably wouldn't know.
Yeah. And I think that's where it can get a little bit dicey with like, I'm interested to see how that's going to affect the later people of Gen Z and like early Gen Alpha.
Yeah.
When they start to read, because I'm like, are you a sixth grader reading Haunting Adeline? Absolutely not. That is going to fuck with your brain. You cannot be reading shit like that. I don't know.
Because I know she likes Taylor Swift, so...
She likes she's very girl core. She's like a theater kid, but I don't know. No, I don't think she is like big on. She doesn't have social media. So I think it's a lot of the preteens that are on social media. I think my sister said she's one of 2 friends in her friend group that don't have TikTok. Everybody else in her friend group has TikTok, like their own
That's
personal ones
crazy.
that they post on.
That's wild.
So she's not really influenced on her own time,
Yeah.
but I don't know. I'm sure give it a year or 2, and I bet she will.
I wonder
I
if
don't
she
know. It's
starts
very
reading. I'm
interesting, though.
curious to know what she starts with, because obviously your sister reads. So I feel like your sister
Yeah.
is one of the parents who would be like very aware of what their child is
Yeah,
consuming.
be like, hey, you can't read this.
Absolutely
but also,
not.
Ella is, she's my niece, a little bit more, like, I would consider her like an advanced preteen.
Yeah.
I feel like she could read Throne of Glass and understand it up
Yeah.
until she would understand everything through Air of Fire, but there are still some like more mature things that I'm like, okay, maybe not quite
Wait
yet.
a few
Maybe
years.
15, 16.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. It's very interesting though.
Also,
I don't
I
know.
would
I
love
think it's
for
cool.
millennials to, like, if there are other things that we didn't mention that really shaped.
Like what books do you feel where we have Hunger Games and Divergent and The Fault in Our Stars? What do you feel like were your like big
staples.
formative young adult books that like
Yeah.
really stuck in your brain and formed your brain, like formed how you think about the world?
Yeah.
Because I know from the get-go I was like, nah, something's going on with these capital people.
Something is
They
up.
don't give
It's
Something's going
they
on
don't care
here.
about us.
Yeah. Well, I'm relating to Katniss.
Yeah.
So I don't know. There were so many things that like popped in my brain while we were talking that I didn't even think about last night.
I know, same. These
I
are
was
fun
mostly,
though. So if
Yeah,
you want to
these
see
are fun.
more
I think
like
we're gonna
millennial,
keep doing some more of
yeah,
these.
because it's kind of fun to dissect
Millennial
like
versus
the
Gen
different
Z.
the different vibes and like
Especially
what is so
with how
formative.
with like the resurgence of bookstores and like I know that there have always been readers, people who have always read books, they never stopped, but for the vast majority there have been gaps in time where reading was not as like popular, I guess, like it just
Mainstream.
wasn't as mainstream,
Yeah.
whereas like I feel like there was a gap there for a while where there wasn't a whole lot of like really
Like,
popular book to movie
In the early
adaptations
2000s,
that-
if you were reading the Spiderwick Chronicles and like really into Twilight and like shit like that, it was almost like those were kind of like the emo kind of scene
Yeah.
kids. They were a little weird.
Yeah,
Like, if you were in high
millennials
school.
really had a hook on the emo scene.
Millennials
era.
had like there was like very and I don't know, I could be wrong because again, we're just talking about like our Texas experience, which is
Yeah.
I'm sure drastically different from like a northerner or
Yeah.
Californian's experience. But like at least in Texas, like the early 2000s, there was very clear lines between social groups and like schools and high schools versus like when we got into high school in the late 2015s.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of like overlapped a little bit, and now it's like, oh, fantasy is cool again. Like ACOTAR's
Yeah,
like,
I saw a thing
cool.
and it was like everything that I thought was cool as a 12-year-old was actually dope as shit, and
Right.
y'all just made me feel like a loser, but I was onto something.
Yeah, we were onto something, but like
Yeah.
there weren't as many clear divides. I feel like
Yeah.
in social
There wasn't like I
groups.
feel like now. Oh, hey, could y'all stop growling at each other? Thanks. I feel like if you're in high school now and you're reading, even if say there's like 2 groups, whatever, there's like the weird fantasy people and then there's like the popular girls, whatever. You're both reading books though.
Yeah,
There's like the fantasy books, but then you could also be reading some romance, some rom-coms. 'Cause
right.
it's just like so much more popular now. And
Like
I
even
feel like
the
Book
popular
Talk
girls
really,
were
like,
fucking with Carden, and that bitch has a tail.
Yeah. Oh God, that's weird motherfucker. But I don't know. I just feel like Book Talk really, social media can definitely blur the lines of young adult to adult novels, but
Yeah.
also it brought back a lot of popularity with just reading in general. Like, I'm pretty sure Barnes and Noble was fucking going bankrupt until we were like, hey, Axel, put your ass back in business. Put those romance novels at the front.
Open actually 100 more stores this year, and also
Yeah.
like Barnes and Noble is the only thing standing between Amazon being the top bookseller. Like, I'm sorry, but the fact that like we've
support
brought
your
books
local
back,
bookstores.
support your local bookstores. But the fact that we've brought back reading to this point is fucking
It's kind
chill
of
as
awesome.
fuck. It's awesome. I feel like
cool.
we're getting to
And
the
we
point
say all of this
where like I feel like we're getting to the point where like it's kind of just like revert back to your 12-year-old. Enjoy what you want to enjoy, and don't let anybody tell you that it's fucking lame.
This knowing we said with the last episode too, we say all of this loving the fact that there are millennials and Gen Z and hell probably some Gen X in Bookstagram, Book Talk, the bookish community on the internet now. I love that you're all here. I just think it's very interesting to kind of, psychoanalyze and dissect what got us all to this point, because we were raised in very different times,
very different,
but we all ended up in the
eras.
same place. And I think that that's really
it's
crazy
so cool
to me. It's so cool, and we
so
love that you're here.
comment your formative books, and we can or comment if you wanted like if you want us to talk about other aspects,
things, or you have things that like other points, especially if you're millennial. Give us your insight,
because we want to know.
Again, follow us on everything. Follow us on Instagram, TikTok. Subscribe
Fable.
to our BookTube channel and Book Club on YouTube. We also post on Spotify. Follow us on Fable, where we kind of try to update what books we're currently reading, and we leave little notes on the chapters. We have a little book club in there that you can join. And Maddie's single comes out at the end of May. It's called Stockholm Syndrome for all my dark romance girlies. And thanks for coming to Book Club.
We'll see you in 2 weeks, and maybe we'll be talking and doing more psychoanalyzing. Maybe. We also might be having a new season. We'll see. Maybe I'm talking out of my ass. I don't know. Nobody knows. Thanks for coming. Love you. Nobody knows. See you in a few weeks.
Love ya.